Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Diverse Governance webcast series. This is the third in a six-part series of conversations to amplify the discussions about diversity, equity, inclusion in our schools. The partnership is between a number of organisations: the National Governors Association, Governors for Schools, the New Schools Network, Inspiring Governance, and AGBIS, the Association for Governing Bodies in Independent Schools. This afternoon, we are talking about inclusive practices in our governing bodies, and we have some brilliant speakers for you. One person is about to arrive. So Irfan Latif is the head teacher of a boarding school. He is one of three BAME head teachers of boarding schools in the country, and he's also a governor. We have Maureen Chiana, who is a governor of a trust down in Kent in the southeast. She's also a charity trustee. We also have Sharon Warmington, the CEO of the National Black Governors Network. And Prince Caesar is the lead governor of a primary school. So thank you very much for joining us today, our speakers, and thank you also to the audience. Just a reminder, if you are following us on Twitter or Periscope, please do pop in comments and questions. They will come to me in the studio and I can then ask the questions to the panel at the end. So our first speaker isn't actually here, so I'm going to invite our second speaker to go first today, if that's okay. Maureen, do you mind unmuting yourself and just giving your perspective about how we can create inclusive practices on our governing bodies?
Thank you very much, Hannah. It's a great pleasure to be here. Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is training. It's really training the governing body in what diversity and inclusivity actually means. It's being able to raise that awareness and having that discussion about inclusivity. And it actually goes beyond it and start talking about belonging. So one of the first things I'll say is creating the awareness first and foremost about what it is, what's the current system in the organization, in the school or primary school or secondary school, whatever it is. What is the current situation? And then why do we need diversity? Why do we need inclusivity? And it's now looking at really how people feel in a governing body. How are they included in conversations? What opportunities are being given? Do they feel heard? Do they feel understood? And it's really, embracing the fact that everyone is different. So it's really being open to different people's perspective. But I think one of the key things is that belonging, because I always say that diversity is a fact. Inclusivity is more like a behavior, but belonging is the feeling, and it's usually the feeling that is so strong that really makes the difference. Should I go on? Because I can keep going. Oh, perfect. Okay. So one of the things, the other thing I would say is actually looking at getting people to understand the mindset as well. So understanding how mindset has a big role to play, and it still comes down to that education, really getting people to understand the biases, the unconscious biases, the unconscious biases, and the fact that a lot of biases are sometimes quite conscious. So it's really taking that responsibility about what you say, what you do, how you make people feel as well, and how you include people in terms of conversations or things that are going on. Because it takes, one of the things about belonging or inclusivity is that when people feel excluded, they actually feel the pain, as a physical pain. You know how you actually feel pain when you hurt yourself? That's how exclusivity is felt in the brain. So people feel it. So it's really getting the understanding. For me, I think that is the first and foremost thing. It's people understanding what it is. Why do we want to make the change? Why is it important to have diversity and inclusivity? And then having actions or people committing to specific actions, and how will it be measured? How do you know if you're being successful? How do you know when it's not being successful? So there has to be definite ways of measuring success. If not, you're just going to be going round in a loop. And I think those four things are really key. to really bring it in, embrace it, and everyone understand it, so that you have those shared goals of where you're going and what you want to achieve.
Brilliant, Maureen, thank you. So that kind of the clarity of direction, but also I love the fact you're bringing your neurodiversity work in here about the actual impact on our brains when we have exclusive behaviours as well. So thank you so much for kicking us off. Sharon, can I come to you next, please?
There I go, unmute. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I wear different governance hats. I work across the private, public and third sector, as well as education, as a clerk primarily, but also a school governor. And I say that to say that I don't want us in the education sector to beat ourselves up about the issue of diversity, because it is reflected across all the other sectors, and everybody is now having this conversation in an open and honest way, which is a good thing. I am CEO of the National Black Governors Network, and we work with schools to aid in the diversification of governing boards and looking at it through a lens of race. And we do that unapologetically, because one of the things that we find is that, well, two things that we find actually, when you look at diversity as a whole, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, but when you look at it as a whole, there are elements which are forgotten, and that is usually the race element, because it is so uncomfortable of a conversation to have. So it's important that we almost suspend political correctness for a period of time and start to ask those honest questions about what it looks like from a lens of race in terms of our school governing bodies and right across the SLT and the middle leadership of our schools. It's about using our difference to make a difference, and understanding that having more diversity also means that things will change. If you're looking for the same, then that's not going to move the school forward. And it's important that if somebody comes on to the governing body who is new, who is different, who has a different lived experience, then they are going to bring that difference to the table. And that will, in essence, make a change. Because I've had some conversations with people saying, oh, well, we had somebody in and they, tried to change everything and we didn't like it. And it's like, well, first of all, challenge is really important. That is what governors are there to do. So having that challenge makes sense, and it should be embraced. And if something is uncomfortable, then maybe you should look at why it's uncomfortable for you. In terms of the term, anybody who's heard me speak before will know that I completely despise the term BAME, and increasingly so, because we all have different lived experiences. Black, in my context, is Black African Caribbean, but Black African is a different lived experience. The A in BAME stands for Asian, but Southeast Asian and South Asian have different lived experiences. So it's important that we start to unpick and almost stop labeling, using that label as a catch-all, because we're not all the same. And when you look at some schools, especially in urban areas, in major cities, a lot of the students in that school are not in the minority. They are actually in the majority in that local context. So they should be addressed and worked with on that basis. We're all navigating a new space. I myself am learning more about South Asian and Southeast Asian and the different cultures and experiences. And so don't think for one moment that you're on this journey on your own. We're all on it together, and we can get there in the end if we are open and honest with each other. Another issue to look at is language. It's important that we find out from, sometimes on an individual basis, what is your preference? How do you prefer to be referred to? I prefer to be referred to as a Black woman, but I know that there are others from my same background who don't like the term Black and prefer to be referred to as an African woman or an African man, or whether it's down to specific countries, a Jamaican man, a Bajan man, a Nigerian. So understand that we've got to sometimes have those conversations at an individual level, not just as a whole group. And another thing that I like at the moment that's happening more in the private sector, more so than the education sector, I think, is a term of reverse mentoring, where the CEOs of organizations are actually being mentored by, it could be, people within the workforce who have a different lived experience, and they're learning in that way, so that as a CEO, they can start to look at what their whole stakeholder group looks and feels like, so that it can inform strategy. So within a school context, that could be at a student level, because I know that there are schools who are being challenged by their students to make a difference and to diversify curriculums and things like that. So that could be a way forward in terms of just changing things for the better.
Brilliant. So many tips already. Honestly, 10 minutes and just the richness and the denseness of what you've both shared already. There's going to be lots of questions, hopefully, to tease out some more detail. Prince, can I come to you then, please? What's your perspective on inclusive practices on a governing body?
Thank you, Hannah, for having me. And I want to say this is very, very important. And the fact that NGA has taken it upon itself to ensure that we talk about this, we engage on this particular issue. And I think that is long overdue, but the steps have been made to actually address that. And so I think I welcome this, and I'm glad that we are talking about it. I want to pick up a couple of things. I would say that when we're talking about inclusivity and inclusive behavior, we tend as human beings to gravitate towards people who are similar to ourselves. And this gravitation, unfortunately, is being compounded by prejudice. And also, when you look at the threat theory, you would understand that when the dominant group feel that the subordinate group are getting headway, there is a threat that kind of poses. So I'm trying to understand why we are talking about it. That means that there is a problem. And the problem is because of our gravitation towards the same group that we always hang up with and do things with. So when we're talking about governing bodies, having that room for inclusivity and having the behavior that then associate with that to welcome people who are not like them, but then they are seen as other, straight away, there is going to be that tension, and it is important that we address it. And someone put it this way, that it seems like you walk into a room, and then whilst in that room, they start looking at you, and when they look at you, then and when I say they look at you, the white folks look at you, and then whilst they look at you, they then start to kind of gravitate towards you, because they then realize that you are not a threat, and that you have, faculties, you've got the cognitive ability to reason and to analyze and to be able to contribute and to add value to what is happening. And then they change towards you. And then at that point, then you have that kind of relationship that would then carry that inclusivity in everything that is happening within the governing body. But then there are some who don't do that at all. And for those who don't do that at all, they tend not to open up and have that relationship, have that kind of rapport. And again, such people would have behavior issue towards the other. And I think that it is important for us to understand that the default setting of a threat mindset can also affect leadership behavior towards the other. And like Sharon said, I mean, I work different hats as well. I mean, as a director of a company, and I work for different companies as well, I have seen that play out. And I've seen managers that are not actually open to understand that there is a need for diversity, and not just that, but also to stand up and to challenge where there isn't any inclusive behavior. And some of them, one, they do it out of fear; two, because they want to preserve their job; three, because they want to gain face. And these things does not help, because when we want to move from where we are to the next level, then we need not just the Black community or the other group to be the force, but we need an inclusiveness that comes from both the white and the Black, because we're talking about diverse governance. And so we are not talking about just a particular group. So when we have to challenge lack of inclusivity and behavior within governance, then I would expect that in a governing body, a white person would also challenge, a behavior that is not inclusive, in as much as a Black person would also stand up and challenge the same behavior which is not inclusive. And I think that when we do that, we will reach the objectives that we have set for ourselves. I think white people must start reading books, written by Black people, letting Black people have a voice, being present, more visible in the organization, also in the governing board. And white people must also make conscious effort and deliberate effort to know Black people for real. And our white colleagues who are passionate about inclusive behavior in the position of power and influence must stand up and stand out.
Very, very clear actions there that we're asking for the listeners this afternoon from all three of you. The questions have begun to come in, so I'm just going to start pinging them to you. I think you would have noticed that Irfan did pop up at one point. He's having technical issues. He's disappeared at the moment. If he comes back, we will get him to speak and give his perspective too. So Sharon, first question coming back to you. You made a comment about language. So one of the questions is, how do you successfully navigate the potential minefield of language in a governance kind of setting?
It is a minefield. I'm assuming that when you're talking about governors coming on board, so I would imagine that chairs or the heads or even the clerk having the initial conversation. And I say as a clerk because sometimes I as clerk am the first port of call for arranging a meeting or whatever with the governor. Don't assume the pronunciation of somebody's name. Say to them, how do you pronounce that? I do that all the time because I don't want to butcher somebody's name, and that is a common problem. And if you think about somebody mispronouncing your name and how strange it sounds, and if they keep doing it, how offensive it then becomes, then imagine if you're doing that to somebody else. So in terms of language, one of the things that I'm doing at the moment is working with an organisation around the Race Governance Code, which is free and available for anybody who's interested, that provides some probably some hard-hitting questions that will make you look at things in a different way. Black is a universal term. I was referred to as coloured on a training session I was delivering a few weeks ago, when I made it clear that I prefer to be referred to as a Black woman, and it was an older governor who said that he didn't like a white governor who didn't like using the term Black, and he preferred coloured. And I kindly and respectfully said to him that it's not really about you. It's about what the other person wants. And picking up what Prince said, I'm reading this at the moment, White Fragility, which is really interesting actually, because I've been commissioned to deliver something for a whole department, 120 people, most of whom are white. And so I, as a Black woman, need to get into the mindset of white people so that I can then train them in how to navigate that racial landscape. So as Prince says, read. There are lots of books out there, and it's not, this one is going to tell you everything. It's not. read as widely as you can, watch YouTube videos, listen to podcasts, listen to the voice of somebody who is different to you, and that will help you to understand the language that can be used.
Absolutely, because I mean, you talked about suspending political correctness to actually have these conversations. Like perhaps actually we've become so PC, we've kind of like lost our ability to have these honest and frank conversations. And I was brought up in the West Country in Devon, and I know Irvan was going to talk about being a man of colour as a head in Somerset. I mean, I have to have very challenging conversations when I go home for Christmas with my family in the pub. I mean, just with people who perhaps don't know the appropriate language to actually use. A question back to you, Prince. How do we change and how do we challenge the exclusivity that you spoke about? How do we disrupt that, the exclusive spaces? You need to unmute, Prince.
That's right. I'm on mute now. What we need to do, I think, is to be bold enough. Listen, nothing comes without a cost. Okay. We have to disrupt what we call the norm of the organization, because the norm of the governing board, because some have been on those boards for so long, so many years, and all that they've seen around them are white folks. Okay. And then suddenly you are shaking that familiarity. You are disrupting that space of security, if you like. But I think it needs a strong voice. It needs people with an inner tenacity, people who know that our world have shifted, we've moved on, and collectively we can do more than what we do with the same folks that we know, because we think alike, we analyze alike. But the moment we bring in diverse views and opinions and people from different background experiences and shapes and forms, that means that they'll be looking at things from different perspectives. So we need to see the value and the benefits that will bring in our governing board. And when we understand the value and the benefit that will bring, not just to the board, but also we are looking at children, because the focus shouldn't just be on the board, because the board is there for the children, all the students. And so what kind of students do we have? I mean, is it a diverse group? Then if it is a diverse group, then we need a diverse board to actually represent those students. And then we can then inspire and aspire young folks who don't look like the others, but they can see themselves within the governing board, to realize that the sky is the limit. So we need to see the benefits that this will bring, and not just think of the friends and the faces that we will lose when we stand up and speak truth in that confined space. And I think that when we do that, I mean, initially it's not going to be palatable, but with time we adapt. That is who we are. We human beings, we adapt. Nobody likes change. But then when change comes and it's for a good cause, and we see the benefit of that change, we tend to gravitate towards it, and we want more of that change. But the initial step to bring about that change, sometimes others will oppose it. And it's a normal human reaction, to an unfamiliar place, something they are not used to. And I know of governing boards that haven't got any diversity in it. So we need to understand that others would find it a bit troubling, but it is okay to shake the boat if that is going to make the boat stronger and not sink it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Prince. Maureen, I'm going to come to you next. There's always questions that pop up about how we feel about Black History Month, and whether Black History Month is tokenistic or whether it's actually a good thing if it's a school that doesn't do anything in its curriculum. Like, can you tell us a little bit about your role as a governor in perhaps holding the school to account for its curriculum or for its assemblies? You need to unmute as well, Maureen. You're so well behaved this afternoon. You're all on mute.
Keep forgetting to do that. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one, because some schools do it more as a token. Okay, it needs to be done, and then they just put something on to do it. And one of the things, and it all still comes down to education. Why are you doing it? And it's asking those questions. For me as a governor, one of the things that I've done is asking the questions, so that people actually embrace the whole reason, the point of doing it. Now, one of the areas that I've worked in is really getting the school to understand what Black history is, and getting getting parents also involved into delivering some of the training in Black history. But I think getting it into the curriculum would actually be much more effective than having 1 month in the year where we talk about Black history, and then after that it's packed and it's forgotten. So, for me, it's just, it's almost more like a token, but really embedding it into the curriculum, even into the PSHE, would make a huge difference, so that even in the delivering of different topics, contextualizing different topics, as teachers are teaching, bringing it in, but also really using the students, asking them their own experiences so that they can actually start talking about it. And it would actually make a lot of kids quite curious about a lot of things. But I've actually seen some parents that were kind of getting upset, even in Black History Month, when kids went home with a worksheet. Why was my child given a worksheet on Black history? Why do they need to know about Black history? So there's a lot that needs to be done. But I think really getting it into the curriculum in some sort, even if you start just by contextualizing your lessons in it, makes a huge difference. And we have done it in a few schools, and it makes a huge difference, because the kids, it also gives the kids, the children, a sense of confidence. For them, okay, we're studying my history, this is about me. They feel more, they feel a sense of belonging. And I keep talking about belonging because that is the one area of inclusivity that tends to be neglected. It's that creating that safe environment where people feel that they belong, that they matter. And I think it will make a huge difference.
That's such a good point, Maureen. I use the word belonging a lot as well. We do tend to be very child-centric about ensuring the children in a school have a sense of belonging, but we need to make sure our staff and our governors also have that sense of belonging. So can I come back to you, Sharon? There's a question here about practical strategies to ensure that minorities are included and made to feel welcome in the governing body. Can you give any more tips, Sharon?
There's a number of ways in which you can do it, again, in my opinion, but when I deliver training, there's key things that I advise governing bodies to do. One is to move away from the standard line of we welcome people from diverse backgrounds. We see that and we just think, yeah, that's tokenistic, not interested in that, because it's just become one of those catch-alls that sort of say, yeah, we've got to put that on because we have to under our equalities policy or something. So I'd get rid of that. I would change from text to imagery. Black people like to see Black people. People of colour like to see people of colour. So find some images. I mean, Google is brilliant now. When you type in Black professional woman, Black professional man, Sikh woman, Sikh man, Muslim woman, Muslim, you get some really good images now that you can use on whether it's newsletters or your website to make things really diverse. And so it's not just, on a page that's, you've got to search to find it. It's actually embedded throughout your website. The imagery changes. That's the first thing that will really show inclusivity, because it means you've taken the time to look at it. Have the conversation. LinkedIn is brilliant. Have the conversation with people that who feel comfortable enough talking about the issue. Don't just approach any Black person, because not everybody is going to be warm and fuzzy about these things based on their experience. It's also important to understand that not every Black person's experience of the education system has been positive. My experience in school wasn't great. I was in what would now be classified as special educational needs. I was told that I should not aspire to be anything more than a factory worker, all of those things. So as adults, if that was our experience of the education system, we're going to be less inclined in some way to get back involved in that. And especially also if our children are being disproportionately affected, all those things play out. So it's being aware of those things. But if you go to LinkedIn and you type in black, first and foremost, put a capital B on our name. We are a race, not a colour. So a lowercase b is the colour, a capital B will make it very clear that you're referring to black people. And if you type in Black Lawyer Society, Black Police Association, Black Social Workers Networks, BAME, anything, you will find us. We are not hard to find. We are there. And the moment you start to have the conversation about skills rather than race, you will get what you're looking for. So you start at your skills audit. If you're looking for somebody with a legal background, then go to the Black Lawyer Society, because you're going to get somebody with a legal background and somebody of colour, and you don't even have to have the conversation about that you're looking for diversity. And so simple things like that can make a huge difference, but you have to change the way you are recruiting now to something different, because we're different, society is different. We're in different places. We're not reading anymore, we're scrolling. And so you have to capture people in an instant as well.
I'm smiling because it seems such common sense, doesn't it, about how to go and diversify diverse people with specific professional skills. And I think we overcomplicate it in our heads. We just need to follow a bit of a formula. Coming back to you, Maureen, about your mention about like starting with training. There's a question here about, are there specific inclusivity skills and practices that governing bodies need to be trained in? Like, what can you give some examples of the kind of training that governors should be thinking about, perhaps building into their training schedule?
So you know what? Sometimes it's just the basic emotional intelligence that people need. Things like empathy, thinking about how the other person will feel. You know, when you're using language, how do they feel? Unconscious bias is a great training if it's done properly, in terms of what is unconscious bias, what are the biases, what are the stereotypes, what are the languages you use. In fact, just example is what Sharon said, somebody saying that I prefer using the word color. It's not about you, it's about the person. Just simple things like that make a huge difference. For me, I think one of the things I'll say is start with emotional intelligence training and start looking at other people as being human beings as well. No matter what, whether it's race or disability, whatever it is, think of other people as human beings and treat them as you would want to be treated. And then when you start having people in, it's just typical examples of when somebody says something or makes a comment or gives an opinion. How do you respond? Do you ignore it? Or do you actually acknowledge what they've said? Because I think it's Prince that said it about in-group and out-group. It is so true. When people like we tend to gravitate towards people who are similar to us. And a lot of time, it's a very subconscious thing that you do because it's familiar, it's known. The subconscious brain is comfortable with it. It's not a threat. But once it's something different, then there's that alert. You want to withdraw because it's perceived as a threat. But it's now the training on actually making yourself to feel comfortable being uncomfortable, and asking the questions, learning about people, doing things you wouldn't have done, including them in conversations, asking questions. What's your opinion? Keep them in the loop. So it's just really simple things like that. But I think first and foremost, unconscious bias, emotional intelligence, empathy, and having people as allies so that everybody is really committed to being an ally. So if somebody says the wrong thing or does something wrong, pick them up on it immediately. Don't let it go. Just say, actually, she's just said the same thing, and we acknowledge it. So it's really being committed and taking those actions.
Absolutely, thank you. So, like, what about the cultural conditions that we establish within that team setting, and how we contract about those behaviours, but also how we contract about how we manage the fallout. How do we do the challenge? How do we have those difficult conversations? Prince, let me come back to you. So, a lot of governing bodies at the moment are kind of like naming an equalities governor, or kind of like finding someone to come and like wear that hat specifically. How do we ensure that governor is empowered and like prepared to be successful in that role? And what sort of priorities would an equalities linked governor perhaps focus on initially? So over to you, Prince.
Okay, I got myself on mute now. I think look, I would start by saying that individual, if I were in that school, I would be looking for a skilled Black individual to head that equality and diversity. And also, I'll be looking at somebody who has a very wide and diverse view and opinion, somebody who understands what it is like to be a Black person, and also understands the perspective of a white person, somebody who is quite holistic in their approach to dealing with different people. So I'll be looking at somebody who has got that human relation, somebody who is not stereotyped in their views, somebody who is not narrow in terms of their viewpoint and how they look at people in general. And I think as a governing board looking for that inclusivity and inclusive behavior, both Sharon and Maureen have touched on language. It is key. I mean, you can do without that. But then again, a lot of training had to be put in there for that individual, because without the training, there are things that they would omit, not consciously, but it could be unconsciously. So training will expose a lot of areas and pitfalls and shortfalls and areas that we can strengthen and make it much stronger, and also highlight the need for each governing board to be conscious and deliberate. Some of these things, they are challenging. So, and I don't like using those words, but I'm using challenging. But we shouldn't be using such words. But that's where we are. In reality, someone who is willing to go against the grain and say, listen, we are not doing what we should do in order to reflect the community we serve. Somebody who has got that backbone to stand and to inform and to ensure that the governing body becomes the real governing body that can live and speak, and people look at that body and say, we understand that you have integrity. Because it's all about integrity and saying, not just like Sharon said earlier on, not just putting that name out there to say that we are ticking a box. We want actions. We want people to be proactive. So if we say we want that inclusivity and we have that individual, I'll be looking out for all this skills and qualities and abilities to be able to challenge effectively and to shine light on areas where the governing body isn't doing great. And I think it comes at the end of the day, it still boils down to the kind of generation we want to raise. It comes down to the kind of people we want, because the reflection of the governing body to the large extent reflects on the school. And the school is made up of those children, those people. And so if we live in the 21st century where we are more diverse than our great grandparents days, then we have to do something about it. We have to make sure that the young Black guys are getting into seeing role models within the governing body that will inspire them to make sure that they get to the top of their abilities and also become a very useful or an asset to the nation, to our community. And we need all that. We just don't want to have all white folks being assets. There are great assets in our Black community. We got to make a conscious and deliberate effort to make sure that we bring them in. And sometimes we don't have that deliberate and conscious effort. So there is nothing in the developmental plan to ensure that within this year we want to have this amount of diversity with skill from the Black community into our school. So let's go out there and make sure that this happens. Okay,
Thank you. Go on.
Yeah, that is very important. Yeah.
Thank you so much. There's lots of questions coming through about recruitment. I'm just going to say, if this is the first webcast you've come to, webcast 2 was all about recruitment. So today we're focusing more on, you've recruited more diverse people. How do we include them? How do we create that culture of inclusion? So please do look at our website at the previous webcast. But a question to you then, Sharon, because one of the things that comes up quite a lot is, how about if you are the only? So a governing body has diversified. They've got somebody who doesn't look like them, sound like them, but then that can be quite a lonely, quite an isolating role. And I'm guessing that's where your network might actually be able to support. So could you please just speak to that?
Absolutely. I spent, I think, 7 years as a parent governor in a grammar school, being the only Black person around the table. I spent 15 years of my career in the corporate world, being the only Black person in around most tables, and even today I still spend the majority of my time being the only Black in the room. It's not a comfortable position, no matter how the individual deals with it. We smile, we laugh, we joke, but we are what I call dialing back our Blackness. We are in that space, almost like overcompensating and making sure that the people around us feel comfortable about us being in that space. And so that's not easy to do. What we do with the Black Governors Network, and if you do have any Black governors who are on your governing body, whether you've just got one or whether you've got a number of them, please do pass on our details, because we do offer support. We do offer training on how you as an individual can challenge without being accused of playing the race card or being aggressive or being angry and all of those things, because it is a difficult position to be in. And for those who have Black governors and want to understand more, as Maureen said, emotional intelligence, cultural intelligence, and understanding the different cultures that are around the table. So, I mean, personally, I think as part of almost every training, there should be a race element. I was talking to a school recently about looking at their policies. Now, the uniform policy, when it talks about haircuts, and if you've been hiding under a rock, you won't be aware of the issue around Afro-Caribbean hair. But a shaved head on a young Black lad is very different to a shaved head on a young white lad. But if the uniform policy says that the hair must be no shorter than an inch, then that will impact detrimentally on somebody of a Black background where they shave their head. Or, my son's just growing locks, and so I can't touch his hair. So, there is an issue with people feeling that it's okay to touch somebody's hair. And I heard a story of a head teacher who introduced a new member of staff to the children and ruffled her hair to say, look, she's not scary at all. And it's like, why would you even consider that was appropriate behavior? So, there's a lot of things that can only be dealt with through training. And that's how you, in my opinion, can retain Black people. Don't look for just one to say, yeah, we've got one, so we're okay. Look for the diversity, because once you start to have that level of diversity, you will see that things can move forward and change, because we are in essence preparing our children for a world that doesn't even yet exist. And that requires a lot of diverse thought.
Thank you, Sharon. And I've just put into the stream the link to the Halo codes. There's been quite a lot of media attention about Black hairs in school and how our policies are quite often not inclusive. There was also something going viral yesterday about a young Somali girl who wears a floor-length skirt to school, and that wasn't compliant to the uniform policy. Like, these are basic things. We can change a policy about a length of a skirt. Like, I've spent 20 years trying to get girls to wear longer skirts because they're usually too short. Like, come on, let's get a grip. I just wanted to share a situation that I went through to get some advice from you all, because I think fear is a big driver with a lot of these conversations, and people are afraid to do the right thing because they're afraid of getting it wrong, and they're afraid of using the wrong language. But I think fear of the media is also a big one. So I had a bit of a fallout with the Daily Mail. I'm actually quite proud of. I ended up all over national news because of our diversity agenda, but it did really rattle my governing body. They didn't quite know how to support me because it became about me as the head rather than about us as the school. And then as a consequence of that, other schools came forward where there'd been issues about a transgender child or about a catering policy or about a uniform policy. How do we navigate that as a governing body when perhaps our commitment as a school to DEI actually gets us attention we don't want, and the tabloids and Facebook kind of start going? How do we deal with that? Who would like to start? Maybe hear from all of you on this question. Who would like to kick us off? Go on, Prince.
Well, I think the way to deal with that is to rally around each other. You know, we need the team to unite around this common cause, and that is very important. You know, when we end up having that attention. And sometimes it can be, and I can imagine, you know, the kind of emotional state, you know, psychological state you were in those times. But I think when you get the support of the governing board around you, knowing that you are not in this all alone and that they are with you, it kind of takes the pressure somehow, in my view, a bit off your shoulders, and you are able to still navigate your way through. But I think in those moments, we need a collective force to stand together, and that is how you know, when one branch is falling off, the others can then come together and support it. But I also understand that there might be other views and divergence, you know, views within the same group. But in moments like that, it is critical that you know, there is a united front and to support and to assist in that movement. Otherwise, it's just gonna be too much of a burden for one person to carry. And that again brings me to the idea of family. You know, as a governing board, we have family. We have to see ourselves as a family. And we are in that particular position to help and enable our children, or the children that we have responsibility over, or the school at large, to be successful. And we can't achieve success when we are not united. We can achieve success when we are not diversified enough. We can achieve success when all that we do is to stereotype and to prejudice and you know, and to say things that doesn't, you know, help build the school and the entire body. So I think it's critical that we unite and stand together.
Thank you, Prince. And Maureen, how about the resilience? Because actually, we need to be quite resilient doing this work, don't we? I mean, the people who are committed to DEI need to be resilient, but also when you've got a protected characteristic, you have to be resilient to be able to navigate these things. So, any advice there, Maureen?
Yeah, in fact, when you said it, one of the first things that really creates problems like this is that fear. You know, it's fear of the unknown, fear of what would happen. And really coming together, like Prince said, is really the core. It's really coming together and having those deep conversations. What is our core value? What do we want to achieve as a school? What are we fighting for? And then it's those conversations that will then give people the kind of reassurance, because a lot of times the resistance is coming from that place of unknown, of fear. So it's really reassuring people that, see, we're in this together. Building up resilience, to be able to build up resilience, people need to know, it needs to connect to something emotionally. And that's why I said, really coming back to ask those questions. What is our core value? What do we want to achieve? Because once you're able to establish that together, you know, having those conversations, having those shared goals, shared values, shared visions, that will help build the resilience to be able to now move forward, so that when those challenges come, whatever, in whatever shape, whether it's media or whatever it is, then you're able to really push through together, to be able to stand together and get through. But it really, with resilience, you need to be able to get resilience. You need something that really anchors you emotionally to it, that is meaningful, so that you can actually get through it. If not, what you end up doing is going back into that comfort zone or status quo, or I'm not getting involved, which is what you tend to see a lot. So I agree with Prince, coming together, establishing that we are in this together. Let's stand together, support our head. You see, because, and it's asking the question, why is the head doing this? Why? What is the whole purpose of it? And then once you establish that actually it's the same reason, we want to achieve the same purpose, and then you'll be able to really push through.
Thank you, Maureen. And just to add to that, Sharon, for your part of the question, like, how do we carve out the time for these conversations to develop confidence and competence in the middle of COVID? Because we know how busy everyone is. We know there's a lot of meetings. It's very operationally focused at times. So how do we hold these conversations? How do we create that space?
Well, what I do with my schools, the ones that I clerk in, we have an agenda plan that we set every year, and part of that plan is to specifically have an away day for governors. Before COVID, it would be an away day or away half a day, where it wasn't, it didn't involve the usual agenda items. It was purely to look at training and development and specific items for the governing body, and to evaluate the governing body, which again happens in the private and the housing sector, having a proper evaluation where we're at. Individually, the chair meets with each governor beforehand, so that it's informing that session, so that we can deal with any issues. As both Prince and Maureen said, it is about the unity. You can have a row around the table, but you have to present a united front. And going back to the issue of fear, wearing my executive coaching hat, fear is in essence false evidence appearing real, because what you may be fearful of isn't the reality. And it's just, that's why I say, just ask the question. If it's going to upset somebody, then they will be upset, but that may be your perception that they're going to be upset about it. But I would much rather you ask me the question than not, and then we are miscommunicating going forward. So let's just agree that I'm going to just do this because I'm trying to grow, I'm trying to develop, I'm trying to move forward. So I'm going to ask the question in as tactful a way as possible, but I'm seeking to learn here. And anybody who asks a question, they're asking that question because they want to learn more. And so that's what we're on. We're on a learning journey. So just learn from each other.
Thank you so much. Well, that's the end of our questions. So I'd like you all to take a moment to think about what your key takeaway or your key message for our listeners are this afternoon, and then I'll make sure everyone knows when our next one is. So why don't I come to you first, Maureen? What's your key takeaway for everybody this afternoon about inclusive practices on a governing body?
I think one thing to remember is that if you're not actively inclusive, if you're not actively including people, you're most probably actively excluding them.
Wow, that's powerful. That is so powerful. So absolutely, I love that as a statement. And I mean, to start every meeting with that, brilliant. Thank you so much, Maureen. Prince, how about you? What's your key takeaway message? You're on mute again, Prince.
Actually, yes, I am on mute now. I'm back on. I think my message is very simple, that white people should stand up and stand out and get to know Black people. For real.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Prince. So building in that social intelligence, that emotional intelligence of actually getting to know the people sat around the table. Sharon, how about you? What are your final thoughts?
My final thoughts, two messages. One to our white allies, feel the fear and do it anyway. And to any black governors in the room, take a seat at the table and lean all the way in.
Amazing. It's been such a powerful conversation this afternoon. Thank you so much. You've got lovely comments in the feed. And I just want to give everyone the date for the next one. So our fourth conversation is on Thursday, the 4th of February, 4 till 5 p.m. We'll be looking at what is the governing body's strategic role in delivering an inclusive education. And we've actually got the CEO of the Black Curriculum joining us, Lavinia Stennett. So it'll be great for us to think about what we can do actually around that inclusive education for the young people we serve. So thank you so much for joining us. Please do go onto the website. The recordings from the previous conversations are there, and let's keep these conversations going and absolutely embrace all the brilliant tips and recommendations from our speakers this afternoon. So thank you, Prince. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Maureen. We'll see you next time.